Meeting of the Metropolitan Council. Welcome, everyone. It is so nice to see you in person. I'm joined by council members Chai, Van Dolen, Strum Cummings, Chambliss, Wolf, and Johnson. So we are more than a quorum of the committee, and it's good to be back together. So, cool. So if you look at the agenda, the first item is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Moving on to item 2, approval of the April 18th, 2022 Community Development Committee meetings. Is there a motion to approve?
Johnson moves.
Thank you.
Wolf seconds.
Thank you, council members. Discussion, additions, corrections? Hearing none, all in approval say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Well, I guess you don't forget that, but it was kind of like riding a bike. I thought I would be stumbling a lot more. Well, we'll see. The night's young. Great. Moving through the agenda to the consent agenda, 2 items. Comprehensive plan amendment for the city of Waconia and for St. Louis Park for Wooddale Apartments. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Second. Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Now on to our first non-consent business item. It's item 2022-127. The City of Gem Lake in District 11, correct? Yeah. The 2040 Comprehensive Plan and Comprehensive Sewer Plan. And Jake Reilly is here to present. Welcome, Mr. Reilly.
Thank you, Chair Lilligren. Is it okay if I'm here? I have to do my own slides, so I'll make sure everybody can hear me.
Fine by me.
We're good?
Sure.
All right,
Great.
thank you. Good afternoon. Uh-oh. Well, before you, I'm Jake Reilly. I'm a senior planner and local planning assistant. It's nice to see you all in person. My hair left with the pandemic. That happened. And before you today is the review of the City of Gem Lake's 2040 Comprehensive Plan. And we are slowly reeling in all the last plans here for Washington County. Is there something I need to do differently?
You can call it up through the end drive. You can call up your PowerPoint or change the council to laptop.
something's
There you go.
happening.
Doing it in the back.
I can do that.
Okay.
I got
Well,
it.
that's actually the second
Yep.
PowerPoint.
I got
There's
it.
Greg.
Right. No, Greg, the second PowerPoint's loaded. This one, Jake, I did
It's
not
my
get
fault.
the-
I was late with my.
Well, I got a PDF, but not the PPTX, so I can't do anything with a PDF. So if you just call it up on the end drive, then you'll be able to present it.
Do you have it on your laptop?
I also have it here.
Plug it in.
Oh, all right.
And it's online too on the website if folks are looking
Right.
on the agenda.
No rush, we have plenty of time.
Yeah.
Apologies.
We have some color coordination going.
Oh, yeah, we're very well art-directed committee tonight.
There we go. Okay.
Style and bunch.
Family, yeah, like a family photo or something.
Appreciate everybody's patience there. All right, so here we have figure 1 in your staff report, which shows the location of regional components within the city of Gem Lake. And of note is the regional trail search corridor running along the northwestern border with White Bear Township. The community designation for Gem Lake is one that is suburban, and that's consistent with Thrive MSP 2040. Gem Lake is located in northeastern Ramsey County and is surrounded by the communities of White Bear Township, White Bear Lake, and Vadnais Heights. Table 2 in your staff report shows forecasts for the 2040 planning horizon. It shows that between 2020 and 2040, the city will grow by approximately 50 people, representing also 50 households, and there will be an increase of 60 jobs in the city in the same time frame. Table 2, also from the staff report shown here, illustrates the planned residential density in the suburban areas of the city. The overall density for guided residential land is expected to be between 5.1 and 7.8 units per acre, which is meets the suburban community designation standard, which is to prepare for an overall average minimum density of 5 units per acre for new development and redevelopment. Next, we see existing and planned land use. They're very similar, as shown in Figure 3 of your staff report. The map reflects the existing land use for the city of Gem Lake, which is primarily single-family homes, nearly 90% of which are owner-occupied. And there's a small portion of the city known as Hoffman's Corner, located in and around the US Highway 61 County Road E intersection, which is the business center of the city. And that area on the next map is slated to be, was entirely commercial, and now they are planning for mixed uses, and have also refined their single-family home designations to allow for more units per lot, which is how they achieve that 5-unit minimum density. And so the findings before you today are that the plan conforms to regional system plans, is consistent with council policies, and is compatible with the plans of adjacent and affected jurisdictions. So the proposed action before you is that the Metropolitan Council authorized the city of Gem Lake to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecasts and surface water management. With that, I'll thank the city staff and their consultants for their work. I don't think anybody's here today to be here for that, but the Environment Committee approved the comprehensive sewer plan last Tuesday, and the Metropolitan Council, the full council, will see this next Wednesday. And that's it. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Reilly. Questions on that report? Councilmember Bento.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Reilly, I just want to make a comment. First of all, thank you. Gem Lake is a gem. It's a tiny community. It's tucked in, you know, among White Bear Township and Vadnais Heights, Maplewood, and White Bear Lake, but they hold their own. One of the things that I find really impressive is that, excuse me, Gem Lake and White Bear Township share municipal facility, and excuse me, all these communities. I don't have COVID. I've been testing, I promise. I just have a really bad sinus infection. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And it's all into
Excuse me.
this terrible.
Boy, I thought I was going to be eloquent. Anyway, they're a very cool little community, and they work really hard and really well together. So thank you very much. This is another one of those, Councilmember Wolf, it's a smaller community. And whatever we can do to help small communities in their planning, I stand with and for, and will do whatever I can to help. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any further questions? Comments? Yeah, Councilmember Lindstrom.
They are a small community, but I see they've grown pretty substantially in the last decade or so. What, 393 people in 2010 to 528 in 2020. Did they have a decent-sized apartment complex go in there, or what accounts for that? Do you know off the top of your head?
Beautiful homes.
Yeah, I think that's probably the case. There were at least 22 more units built, so I'm guessing that's but I can also look into it and get you a more concrete answer
I'm
if you
just
like,
curious.
Commissioner Lindstrom. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? Comments? Councilmember Bento, did you want to move approval?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. I move approval.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. Discussion on the motion to authorize Gem Lake to place its 2040 comprehensive plan into effect and to advise the city to implement the advisory comments in the review record for forecasts and surface water management. To state the motion, seeing no discussion, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for your work and for your report. And we will move on to our,
Mr. Chair?
yeah,
okay.
please.
We have, for your knowledge too, I just wanted to share, we have 13 plans left to review. We're really close to the
Thank
end.
you.
We do have 5. This doesn't count the 5 that are scheduled for your next meeting. So the next meeting will be a whirlwind of plans. And then there are just 3 that we haven't yet received from small communities as well. But we're hitting the pavement and getting out to those communities to get them going.
Not banging your head on the wall.
Banging their doors, maybe.
Thanks for checking on that, Lisa. I'd asked her how many were left, so she's, I'll find out. Yeah, you can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. Cool. Heather, so our final item is an information item. It's the 2023 Community Development Preliminary Budget presentation, and live and in person, it's Heather Aagesen-Huebner. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chair, committee members. This is fantastic.
Isn't it?
We're a little rusty, but we're gonna get there. This is one of the best, this is my most fun presentation of the year. It is the time where I get to dig in deep with what the program units have done the previous year and what the coming attractions are. So that's really what you're gonna be seeing tonight. So we're gonna talk a lot about, I'm gonna give you a little bit of background. Gonna kind of follow the same pattern that we did last year. We've been talking about how you wanna see the budget framed. We have done our best to frame it for you that way at this presentation, so just open invitation. If after I get done, there's more information you want it presented differently, you want another level of detail, that feedback would be really helpful, and I'll follow up if there's something that we didn't happen to hit the mark on for you today. So we'll give you a little bit of background about how we build the budget. We'll talk a little bit about the economic conditions that our region is facing and that our programs are operating in. We'll talk a lot about the work that we've done to advance Thrive MSP 2040, and then we'll do kind of the traditional kind of pie charts that you're gonna see when you get to the council about how the sources, the uses, how we're spending the money, and I'll go into a little bit more detail there. And then I'll give you a preview of some more of the upcoming targeted budget conversations. So you've all seen this chart before. We're really early in the budget process. So what you're gonna see is kind of the division's first take at our budget, and we're gonna be refining that throughout the course of the year. One of those ways is going to be through really targeted conversations about specific subject matter areas, and some of it will just develop throughout the course of the year. You've been here a while now, you know that the Metro HRA budget doesn't tend to land until much later in the year because that's when we get information from the federal government. The federal budget years don't play real nicely with the council budget, so a lot of what we have right now with the Metro HRA is forecast, and we'll tend to land that later in the year. We'll also come back with you a little bit later in the year to talk about our capital program. So this is a slide that you have seen me present as many years as you have been here now. We really build the budget to support Thrive MSP 2040, and specifically in community development to support the housing policy plan and the regional parks policy plan. Planning is a lot of what we do in our division, and we not only lead the development of the regional plan, but we have some very specific policy plans that we support ourselves. When we are constructing the budget, we're also paying a lot of attention to financial stewardship. We're not only looking at an annual year budget, but we're looking at a multi-year budget and making sure that we're structured over time. The framing is going to really take a look at the list of items that you have helped develop over the course of your time here, framing the issues in what our regional role is, providing data analysis and research, specifically disaggregated data when we can, taking a look at our equity impacts, taking a look at the general economic conditions, identifying ways where we can leverage other regional, state, or federal funds where we can, and figuring out how and where we can make timely financial impacts, and then just kind of broadly supporting council initiatives. So these are all of the things that when we are working with the program units and we're kind of starting to build the budget from scratch, this is the environment that we're working in, and these are the items that we're talking about. So we did develop this budget and kind of landed on it, about 5 or 6 weeks ago, which means there's a lot that's still left to change. So we're going to be taking a really close look at financial forecasting for 24 moving forward. We're all anxiously awaiting the end of the legislative session. That has the potential to impact our budget. We're closely watching our federal budgets because that has a really significant impact on our Metro HRA program. We're going to continue to work to support council strategic initiatives as those develop. And the division work planning efforts, as you've helped us develop over the handful of years, we'll start working on those later this year. And then we're always watching COVID-19. We are here in person now, and we're just keeping a real close eye on what's going on, just from a health perspective, but also a regional economic perspective, because all of that impacts our work. So what I'm going to go through with you now is just really high-level economic conditions. Our research department puts out amazing information. I am basically leveraging point for point their great work. I do have some additional resources in the slide deck, and if anybody is interested in kind of the 2 to 3 page summary of the full summary of what they put together, I can follow up with that too. A lot of what I'm going to say, you know, but I still think it's worth repeating. So we're still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic repercussions. The state's GDP bounce back in 2001 was about average compared to the nation and peer states. Our annual gross domestic product of Minnesota was estimated at $429.4 billion in Q4 of 2021, and this amounts to an annual growth of about 12.1% and 5.6% in real adjusted terms. As you know, everybody had to make adjustments, right? So right now that we're seeing that industries have made different adjustments in work routines, work schedules, workflow and business models have changed, technology is being used in different ways. I went through this slide deck to make sure I didn't have any acronyms, and I missed one. This is the slide where I missed it. So I think this is something that we've all inherently seen in the news that we're watching, in the reports that we're getting. Some segments of the economy are bouncing back and others aren't. It is not an equal recovery. So in the Minneapolis-St. Paul MSA, which is the acronym I missed, that's Metropolitan Statistical Areas, the manufacturing section and other industries have fully recovered employment back to 2019 levels. Local demand for in-person type services is not bouncing back at the same level. There's reduced demand, reduced activity, and unused capacity. Consumer spending patterns still aren't entirely back to normal. The pandemic is continuing to inhibit certain activities like entertainment, recreation, and travel. The Metro's economy strides towards recovery are frustrated by the Great Resignation exodus of folks. This is something that we hear, we see it in our statistics as well. There are socioeconomic disparities evident in this Great Resignation. The Twin Cities metro area fully recovered its high-earning employment back in January of 2021. Below median income employment, or those jobs paying less than $37,000, remained depressed throughout 2021, with total employment down 20 to 30% below pre-pandemic levels. Workers who have dropped out of the market are disproportionately older workers or lower paid workers with fewer benefits, or workers from retail or service businesses that have reduced their operations. At the same time, Minnesota has above average job openings compared to the nation and peer states. Many of us around the region, whether we are looking for staff here at the council or likely in organizations you work in, it is a tough job market for hiring. We have luckily had amazing folks that we've been able to hire in community development, so we haven't felt that quite as much within our division proper, but it is certainly a regional barrier that we're working in. So this is my cheat sheet of data and sources. So if anyone really is interested in digging into the data and would like additional information, you can go ahead and look here. Again, otherwise our research department has additional resources that I'd be happy to share with you. So let's transition into talking a little bit about what did the budget investments that you've done in the last kind of 12 to 18 months, how did they materialize in Advancing Thrive MSP 2040? So one, we are working towards the 2050 development guide. It seems like we just get into implementing one and we're already thinking forward to the next. We have delivered our Comp Plan Composite Series, and that's a series of reports and trends for the 2040 Local Comprehensive Plan. So we're doing that, we did the work, we're gonna analyze the work that we've done, and we're gonna play that forward and see what lessons we have learned. We've completed some initial 2050 regional population and economic forecasts. We've completed the 2021 Census and Land Use Trends Analysis. And as I mentioned a bit earlier, we've initiated the 2050 Regional Development Guide, specifically some vision and values work. So Continuing on, we're gonna have, the 2050 Development Guide's a big deal in this next coming year, and it's an investment in our budget this year. So in 2023, we plan to continue the vision and values work, continue forecasting work on the land use policy, parks policy plan, housing policy plan, and in our budget, there is $500,000 for enterprise-wide initiatives. We know that as the work continues and the planning continues, there's going to be additional project work, additional research, that as the council members engage, that we're going to want to have a little bit of room in our budget to do that. So kind of the administrative home for that is the community development budget. So it could be a project from Metropolitan Transportation Services, Environmental Services, Metro Transit, but the administration home for some of those additional dollars set aside is in our budget, and that is one of kind of the one-time investments that we're asking you to make. We also continue to work on equity initiatives, excuse me, both across the region and within our own staff. We have had historic investments in LCA's local housing incentives program. It's one of the ways that we've been able to make a timely impact. It's a way we've been able to build and promote affordable housing. We have continued to expand housing choice and capacity in the Metro HRA. That has been with some innovative work, like examples like with the city of Edina. We are working on the home disposition and sale policy that you acted on, you talked with Terry Smith about a couple of months ago. And we continue to do enhanced equity and engagement requirements in the regional parks. So making sure that we're impacting planning on the front end as well as specific investment decisions on the back end. And we've also been doing a lot of staff capacity. We've enhanced tools and resources for division staff. We've done division training. We have toolkits. We have planning guides, basically making sure that we know that our staff are at very different journeys with the equity work, and making sure that we have a whole breadth and depth of work that as we look for folks that have the right skill sets that we want to hire, develop those skill sets as they are here so that we can continue to do the good work around the region. We're continuing much similar work in 2023. Across the region, we're going to continue to center racial equity and environmental justice in our work. We want to make sure we continue to create real choices where we can live and recreate. We're going to continue to invest in affordable housing. Specific limits, obviously, will be set by this body. Master plans for regional parks and trails is going to continue to require an equity analysis. And we have a lot of competitive grant programs, and we will invest in equity, we're assuming, by sharing the scoring criteria with you that then you are going to help us solidify through parks programs and livable community scoring criteria similar to what you've done the past couple years. We're going to continue to make sure that our staff are in a place where we can work on equity and help be leaders in the region. One of the things that we're going to be doing is the division has our own racial equity action plan that was developed a handful of years back. We're not dusting that off, but we've completed much of the item that was on that first cut. So this is going to be a big year of taking a look at that plan and see where we want to take that in the next 3 to 5 years. We have an equity change team. It's a staff-led group that partners with the leadership team. They've done a complete overhaul of their website to make sure that all of the resources available to staff and managers is very easily accessible. And we continue to have regular conversations across the division to better raise up our equity efforts, grow staff capacity, and better institutionalize equity. So moving on to livable communities. We've done some really cool work, folks, here in the last couple of years. So in the last year, we invested $14 million to help create more livable and mobile region. We invested $8 million in affordable housing projects that will help create 557 affordable homes and preserve another 113 affordable housing units. We've invested $3.2 million to help clean up 22 acres of land, produce and preserve nearly 543 affordable homes, and or retain nearly 400 jobs. Moving forward in 2023, we're going to continue a lot of that similar work. Livable communities will be partnering on the housing plan policy update. We're going to be working through the LHIA affordable home ownership pilot. That was one of the council's strategic initiatives in this year's budget, but a lot of that body of work will carry through 22 and 23. You'll all have an impact on how those dollars are allocated through the scoring criteria development, similar to our other competitive grant programs. And our staff are also continuing to work with our community partners to identify where there are barriers to the grant application process and remove those when possible. Our local planning assistance work is stamped all over the 2050 Development Guide and 2040 work. They will continue to partner on the 2050 Development Guide, continue to work on they've worked on the 2040 Comprehensive Guide debrief. So really take a look at what did we learn through that process and how can we apply lessons learned. There's a, excuse me, I just realized I have an extra bullet point, so that's another thing that struck through, sorry about that. And they're continuing to develop tools and programs to support local governments. In 2023, they're going to continue to work on the 2050 Development Guide, really start to re-engage with our communities in an in-person basis. You know, folks have done a really good job adapting to technology, and there's still something that the face-to-face contact really helps in building partnerships and supporting everybody's work. It can continue to offer assistance to communities through the sector rep program and implement process improvements identified in the 2040 Comprehensive Plan debrief. The Metro HRA has been busy. You've heard Stephanie and Terry here talk about a lot of these items, so I'm really just going to do a brief highlight. But we're working with the city of Minneapolis to expand housing choices for folks. And we've got another $5.2 million of federal funds to help implement that. That budget will be over a multi-year time period. We've got 218 new emergency housing vouchers, which is really able to help put us in a position to help families in the region. Getting new vouchers is not something that happens often, and we celebrate when we get them because that means we can make a real impact on the community. We've had the City of Edina Housing Partnership, which you're all very aware of. And we continue to not only work with our government agency partners, but to make sure that we're gathering information from the folks that we are working with in partnership to support. And that one example of that is the Residential Preferences Study. So in 2023, you're going to continue to hear about the Community Choice Mobility Demonstration Program, the Home Ownership Program, implementing a Youth to Independence Program, and a Residential Preferences Program. So I'm going to spend just a minute here on HRA. Right now in the preliminary budget, we didn't have the 22 federal dollar amount when we built the 2023 preliminary budget, so I just want to call out that when you look at the slide deck later in this slide, it's going to be a forecast of 22 and a forecast of 23. So there's a couple things that we're going to take a really close look at, and we'll talk in a lot more detail about this later in the year, but I do want to call out for you what's happening with our per unit costs. So per unit cost is the amount that the council pays per voucher. And I know many of you know this, but it's just worth highlighting. We don't have a lot of direct control about this per unit cost is. It's a combination of the rent limits that we set, which you all have, you vote on and you take action on. It's how much the housing rental rates are. It's the cost per unit. And then it's how much income our clients have. So when rents are going up and folks are losing employment and losing their income, that means that the council's share of those costs continues to go up and up and up and up. You can see what's happening with that on the chart. I know it's kind of a thin line, but the important thing to know here is that for a while, this per unit cost was leveling out, and that means we can serve more folks. Mm-hmm. As that per unit cost continues to go up, that is an indication that we can do less because we can't serve as many folks because we have a federal allocation of dollars. We are prevented from putting any local money into that, so what we get from the feds is the limit of what we get. So right now, we're hoping that it's starting to level off. We're not sure how optimistic that is, but just know this is something that we are watching really closely, and it's going to be a really big deal as we get to the point of setting rent limits later this year, because there's always this push-pull of needing to set those rent limits at a dollar amount where people can secure housing, and as they're higher, that means we can issue less of our available vouchers. So it's
Yeah, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would assume that the per unit cost is also affected by family size and therefore unit size too. If we have more big families, we end up with a bigger per unit cost. Is that the case?
Chair,
Yeah.
Chair, council members, kind of, I think is the answer. One of the things that I'll do is I can maybe come back with some additional details on that. Larger units do cost more, but I don't have that dollar amount at the top of the head. So why don't I, if it's okay, I'll flag that as an item to come back with more details on. Unless, I don't mean to put you on the spot, Lisa, unless you happen to know the answer to that offhand.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Wolf, it certainly is a factor, but we can get the detailed more. Obviously, larger units do cost more, and that income level staying flat for most of our households or falling is probably the larger factor in that than anything else, especially if you look during COVID, you see 2020, 2021 really spike up in our per unit costs, and that's when we were really seeing a whole lot of income change amongst our tenants in this last 2 years.
Thank you. Yeah, it would be interesting to see how some of those demographic factors impact that almost vertical line on the graph.
Yeah, well, Mr. Chair, council members, Terry and Joel are going to be coming back later this year with a whole lot of details, kind of in advance of you setting your rent limits. So I'll try and get you a quick answer that I'll just message out, and then we'll make sure that they integrate that into their slide deck as well. That meets your needs.
Thank you. And I have other council members in queue, if you would please. So first, Councilmember Chambliss and Councilmember Cummings. Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, this isn't really necessarily related to our initiatives and how we plan to use our budget, but this per unit cost graph is really interesting because I'd like to see like another graph that shows how many people are losing access to housing that are, not permanently sheltered. And that's not just people who are outside unsheltered, but people who don't have, rent in their name, let's say. Because I would imagine that there's a correlation as the price of housing goes up, people's income goes down, and other factors that make it harder to get housing. I think it's important for the public and policymakers to see what our stress points are for our region and for livability and how that's impacting the cost. Because, sometimes, we hear, well, we don't want our taxes to go up. But if people don't have good incomes or access to affordable housing, and we want to make sure that they're not homeless, then our costs will go up, and so will our taxes. So it's really important for policymakers to understand the dynamics there.
Thank you. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you can put your federal hat on for a moment, what is the thinking behind the feds not allowing any local money being added into the pot?
Aagesen-Huebner.
Chair, committee members, I think the system was elegantly created to shrink.
We could expound upon that a bit.
Yeah, please,
in
Director
that,
Ross.
as you may recall, if we have cost savings, we don't recoup those savings. We only get an allocation from the feds for the following year for what we spent in the previous year. So if we save money, it doesn't encourage you to be efficient. But it also doesn't encourage you to, like, they set the limits or the funding so low per voucher that it's really hard to make that work, especially if you want to expand the number you can use. And so you kind of see this downward cycle. I think we've shared in past slides as well, or in past years in our budget conversations, that you can get into a downward cycle of decreasing funding. So Heather said it very elegantly.
Oh, it's unfortunate.
Thank you. Further discussion, I'm sorry, Councilmember
done,
Cummings, were you
Councilman?
done? Okay, thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And at the same time, and we've seen these graphs too, we're trying to expand the opportunities so that we can add units that will take housing choice vouchers, and that can be very challenging, especially when we're still in a really tight rental market. I'm a bit surprised that it hasn't widened up more. And from some of the last statistics I've read, it's still pretty tight here. And then I still want to track, how many families are out there in their 6-month window, I believe it is, that are not able to find that place. So we've got a constant churn that is out there trying to find vouchers. So we see that cost per unit, and we see other indicators, and when you put it all together, it's really interesting because we're in a very difficult spot when we're trying to tweak things that we don't have a lot of control over. So, we all know that, but when you look at the whole picture as it relates to some of these data points, it's compounding itself. We know this, right? But, and I don't know if, it's interesting you bring up, the fact that locals can't put money in. I would say locals are putting a lot of money in other areas to help make this better, and I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, but it is what it is, so.
Thank you. Councilmember Vento.
I'll try and say this without coughing. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In one of my previous careers, I helped organize what we called Adopt a Legislator, and we'd encourage state legislators, and actually we'd encourage people at the local level as well to go spend a day in the classroom, because so many times there's the assumption that it's easy to teach. And to a person, the reaction was, OMG, how do they do it? I think it would be interesting for the Housing Coalition to consider that with all policymakers and people who are dealing with these tough challenges, including us. It'd be a little bit like riding along with the HAT team, but to see what we're talking about. I drive by, homes and residences, apartment buildings that are affordable, but not very often. I don't think that I've ever been in them. And I think it would be good for us to get a kind of a firsthand taste with those individuals who are willing to open their doors to strangers so that we can learn something. I think it's hard from this distance to really grasp the struggle that folks have. I had a conversation this afternoon with a resident in District 11, and I need to do some follow-up on it, but boy, I practically cried. I really felt for her. She's in a housing situation that she just does not feel comfortable in. She's been there for a number of years. The income limits really, make it difficult for her to move because the housing supply is so low and it's so expensive. And, what do you say to people? And I'm almost tempted to call her and ask her if I can come visit. Because I just think I'd have a better perspective on what we're facing. So, something for us to think about.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Johnson.
And just briefly, I think Cranberry Ridge is going to be, if they haven't done it, they're going to be doing their ribbon cutting and people be moving in soon. And that is a project that's been going on for years. And to your point, just getting that in place. So the Plymouth HRA was involved, our HRA was involved, getting it approved. And that has, I think, 3 and 4 bedroom units. And let me tell you, the neighborhood, for all the reasons that come up, weren't too excited, but it's going to be opening. But that thing was on life support many times. But I can't wait to get, hopefully an invite over to just see it. It's brand new, and the best part about it is the relief and the joy of the people that are moving in there. It's palpable, but it just even for that chunk of units to get placed is so hard. But it's good to see some of them make it across the finish line. So I know for me, if anybody wants, it's Plymouth, so for some of you it's quite a drive, but I know Beacon would be very happy to have anybody come and just take a look. And they're in other communities too, but this one's opening up pretty soon, or has just opened up.
Cool. Further discussion, Councilmember Vento.
Mr. Chair, it's a great example of where we could learn. I would also encourage us to also look at the existing housing. Some of it, I think, maybe in tough shape, at least from what I heard today. This is somebody who has lived there for a long time and just can't get out. She feels trapped. And I think she'd give anything to be moving into a Cranberry Ridge-like setting. I remember doing ribbon cuttings, or they didn't call them that, but housewarmings when I was on the Twin Cities Habitat for Humanity board. And boy, there was nothing more joyous than when those families got their homes. It was, and just the pride and the gratitude that just beamed on their faces. It was very emotional. And so I think that up close and personal is good for us.
Councilmember Wolf.
Just to follow up on Councilmember Vento's comments, I've been on tours in both Scott and Dakota County where they got a little bus or even a big bus and drove people around to see the new affordable housing developments that have been put in place. And sometimes we even got to go inside the units and see what the layout of the units were like. But I mean, it's good to help people see, because sometimes you don't even realize that they're affordable units. Like they had one in Egan where it was a market rate townhome development, and then the CDA bought a section of it, and the units look the same, but they're affordable.
Well, thanks for sharing. Any further discussion right now? Seeing none, Heather.
I feel like I should add a bright spot to this because I feel like I brought a little too much doom and gloom. There are some real bright spots in the HRA budget also. One, the federal government has had historic investments in housing through the pandemic, right? So while these per unit costs have gone up, the feds have provided money to, one, help make sure that we can issue our vouchers. We've gotten additional vouchers, and we've got some really cool partnerships going. So like, we are in a solid financial position right now with our HRA. So I just want everybody to be assured we're not in a structural deficit. We are fine. And there's still a lot that we're watching really closely, because with a little bit of a tweak of a dynamic, things change for us. If the feds don't invest at the level that we're anticipating they're going to invest, that's a dynamic we have to deal with. If the rental market continues to go up, that's something we have to deal with. Now, if you look, it does kind of flatten out in the out years. We're forecasting it flat because that's what some of the initial research that our research team has done is indicating. We're going to be updating that. So that's another reason to be happy too, because if we continue to get the same amount of federal funding and our per unit costs start to at least level out, that means we can issue more of our vouchers. So I don't want you to walk out of the door thinking doom and gloom. Like, there are some real bright spots right now in our Metro HRA. There's just a lot of uncertainty that we're going to continue to watch, just because we don't have the control over and the certainty of the funding like we do a lot of our other programs. All right, let's transition over to parks. We awarded 23 regional park system equity grants, done work at the first phase of the regional park system GIS improvements that helps us plan, that helps the 10 implementing agencies plan, that helps us tell the system story better, and we've conducted the parks visitor study. Moving forward into 2023, parks folks are going to be involved, as just about every program area and CD is, with the 2050 development guide. You're going to continue to help advance equity through the regional park system historical cultural study. Some of that will be starting in 22, but will be wrapping up in 23. And continue to convene and have enhanced coordination with both state and regional partners. We've been able to do some really cool partnerships over the last couple of years with not only the 10 implementing agencies, but with the DNR and Greater Minnesota Parks, and we're going to continue with that moving forward. So,
I'm sorry, one second. Yeah, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thank you. The equity grants, are those every other year?
Chair, committee members, the schedule right now is about every other year. And it's been for a couple reasons. One, it allows us to kind of accumulate some interest earnings to program for the operating components, which has been really important for the implementing agencies, and it also kind of gives us a couple years of bonding dollars that we can package. There is going to be a business item coming before you, or information item or business in June.
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 There'll be
preview of that business, and I don't mean to steal our Parks Department's thunder, but I think we're gonna be asking to push that out a year. One, because the pandemic has really kind of slowed down some of the procurement type work, so agencies need a little more time to finish their existing equity grants, and we haven't been making as much money on interest earnings, so there's also not a real sizable pot right now of interest earnings to program. So that'll be a coming conversation to you about whether we're gonna continue with the every other year, or we may wanna push out an additional year.
Councilmember Wolf.
It sounds like some of the problem with the interest earnings is gonna get worse because in the budget deal that they announced, was it today or yesterday? It's the smallest amount of money for regional parks that I've seen in the whole time I've been here. Pretty dismal, less than $3 million, which is really sad because it used to be working its way towards 10 million or more, and instead it's going very drastically in the other direction. And when you don't get much in for bonding, then you don't have much in the way of interest earnings.
Thank you.
May I ask a
Yeah,
follow-up
please,
on that?
Councilmember Lindstrom.
Is that the same with state parks then? Is there like a equal match, or do you happen to know?
I don't.
Their
So
amount?
state parks have been getting better funding than the regional parks have.
Because it was always, if I might, Mr.
please,
Chair,
Councilman.
my understanding that the legislature treated regional parks sort of like the state parks for the metropolitan region. But at least not, they don't, in the area of funding at least this year, it appears.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, regional parks are considered sort of the functional equivalent of state parks, but when it comes to funding, the legislature tends to interpret earmarks for specific parks as part of that regional pot. So if they give money directly to Como Zoo or City of Minneapolis or whatever, that takes away from that shared pool that goes to everybody that's distributed by formula. And it's been going more and more that way for the last several years of earmarks rather than just giving it by formula, which is unfortunate because some of the smaller agencies really lose out that way.
Can almost have a punitive impact on the local communities. Councilmember Vento.
It's my understanding, and this probably happens to a great extent with state parks as well, but also I know it happens with the regional parks, is that many times counties will go in and lobby for a specific regional park project and kind of get ahead of us. And that, you know, so it kind of usurps our ability to get the money we need. And, you know, it's well-intentioned, but it doesn't help the process.
Well, all right. Heather, please.
Okay, moving on to research. Pretty much every other program area has some research department element in it. So while I've called out a handful on this slide, this is by no means encompasses everything that our research group does. So just a handful of highlights is they've worked on the 2020 census, and they've developed interactive visualizations so that anybody can go out and check out their community and get to see demographics. And if you have not spent any time on our research department website, I highly encourage you to take 5 or 10 minutes to do it. The information that you can kind of get at a click of a mouse is really pretty amazing. Earlier in my career, I did research, and I remember like how hard I had to dig for it, and now I look at it and it's amazing. It just pops up, and it's this great service that we've got for the region and for policymakers. They also completed the Parks Visitor Study, and they began a partnership with the DNR and Greater Minnesota Regional Parks to get better user information. They created the first regional forecast of population and jobs for 2050 and continued development of our local model for population and employment. And they completed some foundational research to develop our tool that will enable all local jurisdictions the ability to analyze the effects of actions to take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And you'll be hearing more about that in about July. So moving forward into 2023, they're going to continue to develop population and employment forecasts as key inputs to the 2050 Regional Development Guide. So you'll be users of that information. They're going to continue to lead scenario planning efforts to inform policymakers on implications and uncertainties in long-range planning caused by the pandemic. And we're going to continue to release updated and enhanced version of Community Profiles interactive tool. So,
Yeah, Councilmember Bento.
I have a research question, and since you've got a background in it, maybe you can answer it, and if not, maybe either in this committee or at a committee of the whole, we could have someone from research come and talk to us about how they do research in a time like this. How does it work? Because I was listening to a story on public radio earlier today about Hungary and this whole issue of sanctions on Russia and blah, blah, blah. But and I started thinking about the domino effect and, what the what ifs. And then I started thinking about, how do you plan ahead as a federal government or as a local government when you don't know for sure, and we don't know anything for sure, but now more than ever, will gas continue to go crazy? Will the supply chain continue to be tenuous? I mean, well, now you can tell that I've got a really bad cold, but I just would be interested in how research does it at a time like this. And maybe even to go back to what they learned about research and what you can and can't forecast from their experience in 2008, 2009. I would find that interesting. And if nobody else does, tell Lisa and you can just forget my suggestion.
Mr. Chair.
Director Barajas.
Thank you. Councilmember Vento, certainly the way that we project and forecast and plan for the future has a lot more uncertainty around it than it had in past cycles where I participated in regional planning and even prior to my time at the council and just comprehensive planning for local governments. And so some of that work we'll be doing is through the scenario planning work and really thinking through about what are the plausible futures, not all of the range of possible futures, because that can drive you a little batty, but all of the plausible futures and thinking about, the likely scenarios. And then for you all as policymakers of thinking about the future that you'd like to see in this region. And then what are the policy choices or interventions that we need to take as a region in order to achieve that, given the range of uncertainty. So it won't feel as easy to get there, but we also, I think in some ways, will be building in more flexibility, resilience into our work, especially just, in my time in the council, we've experienced two major significant impacts, right? We've had the whole housing burst in 2008, 9. I don't remember. I was having babies at that time. I don't know what I was thinking. And then with COVID and everything that's been happening right now too, these are huge, major world events that we could never predict. We wouldn't be working here if we could. We'd be making money elsewhere. But certainly are things that, as we look over the range of 50, 100 years worth of data, you can see some patterns, and then there's some patterns you can't see. So really trying to build in more of that resilience into our overall work as we're thinking forward. But we'll be digging more and more into that in our 2050 conversations in the coming months and over the remainder of this year with you all too.
Thank you.
Cool. Anyone else? Ms. Aagesen-Huebner.
okay. So back to the 2023 initiatives, and the one piece that I would add is, from a financial forecasting perspective, we do a lot, we look at a lot of what history has told us. So just know that when we're building our budget, we're not only looking at one individual slice of a year, we do at least 10-year forecasts so that we understand what's happening with levy limits. If we're asking for a new expense with some operating tails, we understand what the impact of that is. So we're looking at it at our state funding forecasts, federal funding forecasts, and our local funding forecasts also. And, and I will tell you that we've done that through the pandemic, and if somebody would have told me 2 years ago we would have been as close as we were, I would have taken it all day long. That's true in the work that we've done here in community development and true in transit. It is remarkable how close we got. And I'm not saying that because one, we tried really hard to do the best that we could, but there, like Lisa was saying, there are historic trends that you can see, and you can, you try and glean as much from those as you can. So when we're proposing the new initiative, so this is kind of like a summary of kind of the new, big new pieces. Just know that we're looking in not only the impacts for this financial year, but for moving forward. So we've talked a lot about the 2050 regional development guides. There's about 500,000 in our budget, again, for enterprise initiatives. It could be transit, it could be ES, it could be community development. There's about 500,000 for the climate action plan implementation. This is an administrative home piece. The actual projects resulting out of that will get developed through more conversations. It could be an ES project, a transit project, community development project. We've got the federally funded HRA work. We've got new vouchers. We've got the mobility demonstration program. So that's a new initiative. The primary funding source for that is federal money. And then we do have some new FTEs that we have in the preliminary budget for a climate researcher, a housing program planning analyst, an outreach coordinator for parks, a land use planner, and then we have about half an FTE to work on grant compliance and support work of these new grant programs in the HRA and CD, and then about 3/4 of a staff for a grant administrator. So a little organizational history on why you're seeing halves is the department, the finance and admin group, does both the finance and the grant work for MTS and CD. So you're gonna see, we're really looking for 1 FTE on the grant side and 1 FTE on the compliance side, but there's a funding mix between both the transit budget and the community development budget. All right, so when you look at all of the stuff from all of the departments, right now our preliminary budget's about $1.5 million below our adopted 22 budget. So just remember, adopted doesn't have the carry forward and some of the strategic initiatives that have come into our budget as a kind of, since it was adopted. This is just from, December 21 until now. So Metro HRA, we're anticipating the pass-through budget's gonna go up about 2%, and the administration cost, that's the staff, about 3%. And we're also anticipating that all of this is coming in federal money. There's a little bit of general purposes levy dollars in the HRA side. So again, this is a forecast of 22 and a forecast of 23, and it's what history and trend lines tell us is gonna happen. We're gonna know a lot more here in the next couple months, and when we know more, we'll share more, but just know, if there's anywhere in the budget that to me feels a little squishy, this is it. On the community development side, which I'm just kind of defining that as everything that's not HRA, program units are going up 15% or 1.4 million. It's a primary function of 2 things. One, it's about that $1 million of one-time enterprise initiatives, and then the rest of that's the new staff costs. Regional administration costs, those are costs allocated to us through regional administration. Those are going up about 8%. That's the HR department, the chair's office, the IS department. Those are centralized departments that you only need one of, and that's our share portion of those costs. The Parks Pass-Through Program, we're assuming that's flat right now. That's a number that could change based upon what comes out of session. Livable Communities is down 14%. Now, I just want to be real clear. That's not that the program is going to get smaller. When you award those grants, they're multi-year grants, and we build the budget to meet that annual cash flow. So I just want, that number is a little bit deceiving. We go out to the subrecipients twice a year and we say, hey, you have this 3-year grant. When are you going to spend the money? And there's ebbs and peaks in that. It's not level. So if you're ever looking at our budget and you see the Livable Communities budget going up and down, that's what's going on. It's just how fast our subrecipients are saying they're going to spend their multi-year grants. And then our debt service is going down a bit too. We levied for debt service in the 21 budget, but we're not bonding for parks programs this year, so we essentially have that funding that we can use forward in 2023. All right, so we're still really early in the process. As I mentioned before, so this is just my flagging for you, items most likely to change between now and the public comment version. And this is not the last time I or program units are gonna be back in front of you talking about budget-related items. So again, the HRA operating and pass-through, depending on what we see with the final numbers for HRA 2022 budget, that may impact our forecast for 23. The Livable Communities Pass-Through Program, you're all gonna define what the scoring criteria is, and we'll come before you like we have the last couple years and say, hey, this is kind of our base revenue. Is there additional revenue that you want to invest either through a strategic initiative, or if there's additional interest earnings or relinquishments that you can program? Parks pass-through may change based upon what happens during session. We should know the outcome of that fairly soon. And then specific project development, as I mentioned before, for the 2050 Development Guide and the Parks Action Plan implementation. We're gonna continue to watch what's going on at the federal and state level really closely. We're gonna continue to refine projects, and you're gonna see a lot more of that project refinement. Remember that schedule that I shared with you earlier in the year, like every quarter it said targeted conversations? That's where you're gonna see a lot more of that detail. We're gonna continue to have stakeholder conversations with you, with our RA partners, with our stakeholders, and that may adjust some of these budgets as well. And then we'll come back and talk to you, and we'll crosswalk any changes that we make so you have a clear idea of what's happening, and we'll continue to kind of move through the calendar. So from a revenue sources, proportionally, this hasn't changed from what I've shared with you the last handful of years. The biggest revenue source that we have is the federal government, and that's our Metro HRA program. We have our property tax is the next biggest piece. That's a combination of the taxes, the livable communities taxes, and general purposes levy funds that funds things like our staff. The state's got about $10.3 million. Most of that's for the Parks O&M pass-through program, and there's a little modest, somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000 or $400,000 for housing. FAHP, that's our council-owned rental income. So we have the units out there, and that is the rental income that comes into the council. I've got about $11 million of reserves. Most of this is livable communities past. It's past levy, but it's in reserve. So really what you're seeing a lot of here is funds have been levied for the Livable Communities Grant Program, and it's really a function kind of cash flow of when we need to use those reserves. Again, we've got 3-year grants that we award on a single year, and then we have all the money in reserves, and then we program the reserves as we need to make sure that we can pay out our subrecipients. And then the other, it's just about $500,000. It's a little bit of money from the DNR to help support some FTEs, and a little bit of interest earnings, and a couple other little pots. So where the money goes, again, these are proportionally very similar to what you've seen other years. The Metro HRA is the biggest consumer of dollars, and that is for the administration or the staff that run the program and the actual pass-through vouchers themselves. The Livable Communities pie piece, the blue, that's the staff costs, and it's the pass-through program, the annual pass-through. Parks is about 13.3. That is, about 10 million of that is the Parks O&M pass-through program, and the rest of it is staff and some consulting work. We paid just under $4 million for our RA allocation, that central allocation, and then the other $8.2 million. There's our research program, and that's mainly staff and some kind of modest dollars for consulting when we need to bring in outside expertise. We've got local planning assistance of about $2 million. It's almost exclusively staff, and just kind of support what programs need to kind of operate. And then there's division management of about $3.3 million. That's some central services, and that's where kind of those one-time consulting budgets are. So there's that $1 million for the climate plan implementation and 2050 development guide that sits in division administration also. So where does the money go? Most of our money goes out into the community, either in the form of voucher payments to private landlords through the Metro HRA program. It goes to parks implementing agencies, and it goes to the cities across the region that have been awarded livable communities grants. About the next biggest chunk of our budget is $13.2 million for salary and benefits. That's why one of the places we always say you have the most impact over our budget is the work plan. So much of our money goes out the door that impacting our budget by directing us where you want us to spend our time and what initiatives you want to work on is one of the biggest places to impact our budget. Again, we've got the RA allocation. We've got about $1.6 million of debt service. We have general administration costs, about $2.4 million. Those are just things that you need to operate. It's small computer equipment, it's training, it's travel, it's professional organization, registrations. It's just a lot of little pieces. We've got FOP maintenance, that's our council-owned housing maintenance. We have some of the bigger maintenance items in our capital program, and these are some smaller ones that we don't have in the capital program. And then contracted services, about $3.7 million. This is where we do outside consulting. We work with procurement and try and make sure that we're really leveraging the council's DBE program where we can. We don't have a lot of money there, but we certainly work closely with procurement there. So kind of a coming attraction of some of the target, you're gonna have a lot of targeted conversations, some led by kind of the finance group, many led by the program areas. So we're gonna come back to you in July and really talk about the grant programs in a little bit more depth, kind of a recap of the impact that you've been able to have so far as you've been seated at the council, and kind of a preview of programs coming forward and decisions that you'll be able to make in the next year or so. We're going to continue to talk to you about the 2050 Development Guide, both within this body and broader at the council, and we'll continue to lay out specific projects for the funding. Fall, as you all know, is a big Metro HRA time. Joel, or the research group, and Terry will come back to you and really give you an update on the small area market analysis that'll help you set rent limits. They're bringing the administrative plan back. That's kind of the high-level administration policy plan. There'll be more conversations about the mobility demonstration program. I do want to share that there is that federal grant award that we have with the city of Minneapolis. They're still trying to figure out the multi-year budget of that, so I just want to let you know the revenue is not in our budget yet, and that's it's not going to be a huge dollar amount, but we do have some of the expense budget laid in, because that's been solidified a little bit more, but there will be some additional federal money coming into the HRA later, and we'll crosswalk all of that, so it won't be a surprise to you what's going up and what's going down. We're going to continue to work with the city of Edina on our housing partnership and imagine what that might look like moving forward. You've all known that we've been looking at selling some council-owned properties. We're real close, unless Lisa has more information, we're really, really close. We don't think there's any issues, but we need the final stamp from HUD that we're free and clear, and we're just dotting I's and crossing T's, but we're real close on that work. And then you'll have your annual conversation about rent standards and utility limits. And with that is what I wanted to share with you today. So I'm happy to take any questions you have, any feedback you have, any additional information you'd like me to come back to you with, kind of a one-on-one conversation or future presentations.
Thank you, Heather, for the presentation, for the work, and for sort of previewing upcoming conversations that we'll be having as we move toward finalizing and then approving the 2023 budget. Questions for Heather? Comments? I think you were Councilmember Vento.
Heather, I love your enthusiasm, and the combination of the enthusiasm and your ability to help someone like me understand this is just invaluable, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. I agree. Councilmember Johnson, then Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would just say, it's really good to have experts who really know the numbers inside and out and backwards and forwards and all the details behind it that are buried into this presentation today, because we can't do anything that we do with confidence if we don't have somebody like you who's confident whether the money is coming in or going out or trends are going one way or the other. It all starts with the budget, because that's the blueprint. So maybe not as appreciated, maybe publicly as much as you should be. Finance people are awesome and really buoy the work that we do, and I appreciate it, so thank you.
Agree. Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is great. It's really helpful this early in the planning process to kind of have this understanding and overview, and you make it so understandable. So thank you for that. That's really great. I'm wondering, without getting specific, I'm wondering, you know, I think one of the things that has come out of COVID is thinking outside of the box and creative thinking and shifting and pivoting, and not just on the Met Council side, but on all of the different entities with which we interact, cities, counties, all kinds of different groups and organizations. So I'm wondering if, you know, if in the wind, and I'm not looking for specifics, but are there other things, you know, I think that there's been much acknowledgement that we can't come out the way we went in. We were failing, and we can't expect different results if we continue to do everything in the same way. So are there initiatives that are maybe sort of out in the wind? I think a perfect example is the city of Edina coming to Met Council saying, you know, we can do this, but we can't do that. How about if we combine our resources and come up with this great, creative, wonderful new project? Maybe there are other cities or entities that are thinking about that. But beyond just that, and it could be also in parks with various entities that, again, want to grow the program much as we do and have our parks more accessible to more people. Are there things out there kind of floating around that may land outside of the budget planning that you've already started to do that may be coming our way that you're aware of?
Ms. Aagesen-Huebner.
Mr. Chair, council members, I'll maybe defer to Lisa first, and then there may be an item or two that I can call out there.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Councilmember Cummings, certainly we have been, our Metro HRA staff have been reaching out to communities who are similarly situated as the city of Edina with local inclusionary housing policy ordinances, and, you know, shopping around the idea of a similar partnership with them. So that's in process. That maybe will land, but at this point, we're, you know, really excited about the success of that work and wanting even just to share that it might invite other ideas or other thoughts that other communities might have in the region around partnership. Some of the work that you might be familiar with that we did regarding our climate work, you know, our Solar for Vouchers program, and some of these other opportunities and tools that we've created, like our Growing Shade tool, was done with partners with others in the region, not just us. It's really important that we are continuing to do that. So our staff are always thinking about who else can we partner, especially in spaces where we aren't in an area of control, but more in an area of influence of how we partner with others to do more together. So those are kind of, there's some things that are out there like that are kind of being worked on and shopping around. And as Heather's already talked about, our home ownership program that we're exploring through the Metro HRA voucher program too is one that we are excited for, but are doing all of that early investigative work of, can this work? Can we do this here? How would it work? All of that type of work, so that we definitely will be sharing that with you later this year as well, where we get. But you're right, those different ways of doing things are the ways that we kind of have leaps forward in our work rather than our progressively incremental steps forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councilmember Lee, then Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This goes into, excuse me, this goes into the weeds about the great resignation, but do we know where the people who left the workforce, where they went? Like, I'm sure they didn't disappear. Like, did they become like stay-at-home moms and dads, or did they just leave one wealth bracket up or down, or vice versa?
Ms. Aagesen-Huebner.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I don't have that level of detail, but I'm happy to follow up with that. I know I have a printout with that information on it, but I'm not recalling it right off the top of my head.
Oh, thank you.
It's so interesting, Councilmember, that exact question came up with, I was at a family gathering this weekend, and we were Someone asked that exact same question, couldn't answer it. Councilmember Lindstrom.
I was just curious, what keeps you up at night when you're thinking about this budget? What gives you the heebie-jeebies? And also, a fun fact, you had a picture of a goat on the parks page, and I think I met that goat yesterday at Afton State Park. I am no goat expert, so I can't do a great comparison, but it looks awfully similar to one I met yesterday.
And what keeps you up at night, Ms. Aagesen-Huebner, about this budget?
Mr. Chair and councilors, I think it's the legislative process. I can control my forecasts. I can control my assumptions. I can't control what the state and federal government do. So I think that is always the big, in this budget in particular, because of the amount of pass-through funding that we have, I like what I can control, and I can't control that. So I think that's what keeps me up, because if we don't get the federal money, there's so much good work that we want to do. We have amazing creative staff that like will push the boundaries of trying to help residents in our region. And sometimes the barriers are things coming out of our federal and state friends. And that's really what keeps me up at night, because we impact people, right? Like in this job, I see folks walking around the parks, and I see the overuse that our parks and the overlove that our parks are getting. I see how dedicated our HRA folks are. You know, like in the transit budget, like we've got Metro Mobility, and like we are providing critical services, and that's what keeps me up at night, the things that I can't control, and it's where we really directly intersect with people, because people want to do such good work, and it's always just like I literally watch Twitter, like how is my day gonna go? You know, like at the end of session, I feel like I'm watching Twitter to see how our budget's gonna look in certain areas.
Well, thank you. That's a good question. Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a brief question. So maybe you mentioned this, but is it all bundles up into the big budget? Is it looking, you know, we don't usually go over 2% increase on our general levy. Are we gonna, do we know, and maybe this is a George or Mary question, but is it all winding up to kind of be at least consistent with, although we did a 0% a couple of years ago, but, and what keeps me up at night, if I may, you know, we've been blessed with a lot of federal money, all the communities around the country to get us through this, because we were hitting cliffs before that money came in, and I don't know how long that support will be there, but we've been very fortunate, right? So, but I'm just curious, maybe it's too soon for you to say, but how it's kind of looking for, you know, the direction we're going in when we adopt our final levy for the big number.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and committee members, there's going to be a presentation that some combination of George and Marie and maybe others are going to be coming to you in June.
Okay.
So I don't have that information for you now, but I can tell you it's coming quite soon.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Other questions, comments? Great work, great presentation. It feels interesting. This is, of course, except for Councilmember Wolf, this is our third go-around now, right, at this? So it's starting to make a little more sense. All right. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
And that's the end of our agenda.